Here we go, here we go, here we go. Once again, all the residents of the world, the people of South Carolina, and welcome to the Leo and Larry Show, the place that tells you where to go and tells you the things that you need to know. And as always, we have the very best of guests. It's as if you were going to a restaurant for fine dining. Never anything here that is fast food or not nutritious to the mind. And so our guest this evening is none other than Dr. Mal Hyman, and he's a former professor at Coca University and now candidate for the 7th District of the U.S. Congress, and a good friend of mine, and in all transparency, someone who I have worked with in the community and I have a great deal of respect for. And welcome Mal Hyman to the Leo and Larry Show.
Thanks, Leo. I appreciate it. Good to join you.
Great to have you. And, for our new listeners, because we know a lot of people know you throughout South Carolina and beyond, why don't you give a little brief history about your life, your journey, and what in the world would cause you to want to run for the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress at this day and time in the history of this country? My friend, my brother, you going up to a rough place.
Truly.
Tell us what brought you to this side.
I came of age 1968, started UCLA that year. It was $300 a year to go to a public college if you could get in. And of course, with the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, the race riots, the political demonstrations against the war in Vietnam, and I ran track. I could see the air I was breathing in Los Angeles, and kind of moved me from romance and sports to seriously looking at politics. And when I finished UCLA, I took a year to do community organizing on environmental issues in Northern California, worked on George McGovern's campaign, then lived in the Middle East on a communal farm, talked to enough Palestinians that I knew there needed to be a two-state solution back in 73, and decided to take the journey of being a teacher. And of course, I learned an awful lot in the process. First teaching was junior high, and 6 classes, 40 in a class, not enough textbooks. I quit after the first year in protest. School district came back and said, would you consider teaching at the state prison, medium security men's prison? And I said, yeah, and did it for 4 years. And again, I learned more from the inmates than they learned from me the first year. My 5th year, they let me teach maximum security prison part-time, and that was my ticket to graduate school. Studied at the University of California, Riverside, did community organizing, met a guy that was part of the Pentagon Papers, which was the revelation during the Vietnam War of the Pentagon report of why we got involved there in the first place. It was appalling. I met one of the guys that gave up his security clearance to tell the truth, and I became a more serious student than a master's degree in international relations. Students that were in the program with me said, you got to go to the war zones to bear witness and do a good job. And I worked up the courage to go Nicaragua in 1985 and learned an awful lot, and started teaching at then Coker College. The great academic freedom. They encouraged me to do human rights work, and I got to the West Bank and in Gaza during the first Intifada, and monitored the election in Nicaragua with the UN in 1990, went to El Salvador and Honduras with the UN to demilitarize those countries, monitored the election in Mexico, 1994, and have been given opportunities to travel on Fulbrights and do political research. And so my journey has been varied. I've done community organizing. I've done teaching in a range of places. Good fortune to teach at a college where they encouraged me to serve on the Community Action Agency board, the homeless shelter board, work on the Boys and Girls Club board, the Genesis board to provide health care for people in the community. And I set up the local Earth Day that you've been a part of in the past out at Calmia Gardens about 15 years ago. I'm appalled where this country is drifting. I'm concerned for people. We can do much, much better, and we need to. And I, after 50 years of teaching, decided I couldn't run for office and teach. So it was maybe time to retire, at least for now, and go at it, borrow from my 401k, and try to speak truth to power the best I can. I'm not taking a dime of corporate or banking money because you can't serve two masters.
Wow, wow. You know, and I appreciate that, not because we know each other, but for so many decades, 10 years first, not a couple of years ago. One of the things that have really bothered me and perturbed me is that we have so many candidates who run for office here in South Carolina with little or no experience. They haven't worked in the communities. They haven't worked on national issues, regional issues, done nothing whatsoever in terms of international, uh, uh, international policy and issues. And I really believe that's why here in South Carolina and other places, why we really don't get our fair share of federal resources. And so that's good. That's good in terms of your background. Because as I said, boy, you've done a little bit of everything, even in prison. So you're not just talking about the prison industrial system where people say folks are actually put on a track in school. They say prisons, they decide how many prison beds they need to make by looking at third grade scores for students. And so you've had all those experiences. Tell me, out of that, do you have a platform? Do you have planks? Do you have specific bills and things you want to work on? Because that's the other thing that really bothers me and perplexes me. All these people that always run for office, and if you ask them what they want to do, they really don't have answers. So, do you have a platform? Do you have planks? What are the most important things if and when you're elected to Congress? What are some of the bills, the legislation, the changes in budget on the federal level that you would be advocating for?
I seek to serve as the first member of Congress that confronts the school to prison pipeline that's actually taught in the public schools and taught in the prisons. And the first story I'll tell on the floor of Congress, and you know this, but I'd like to share it, is after playing basketball with the inmates, I asked them, everybody's tired. When did you lose hope? Fall into despair? And typically they'd say at the age of 10, 11, and 12. Well, they made some bad choices, but they didn't pick their parents, their schools, their communities, or their country. We made a lot of bad choices. And either we're going to truly leave no child behind, or we just keep talking about it. Either we do unto the least of these, or we just keep talking about it. I believe Marion Wright Edelman out of Bennettsville, who inspired Martin Luther King's Poor People's March on Washington, was right that all children have a right to food, health care, housing, good schools, safe streets, clean air, and clean water. Policies must be developed so that children have those opportunities. They live in dignity. They have security. We're going to have to tax the wealthy their fair share to responsibly invest in restoring the American dream. We can do it. Other countries have done it. Republicans in Congress have given the wealthy tax break after tax break and have gutted social programs, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration. They've gutted government agencies. So we get less from government and people expect less. And I think you're right. A lot of people who go to Congress are out of touch with working folks. I've had women who are working minimum wage jobs, can't support their kids, in tears, talking to me. I mean, again, King talked about the minimum wage being a crime in this wealthy nation for people to work for starvation wages. We need to get the minimum wage to a living wage. I think it ought to be $15 an hour in places like Hartsville or Florence, $20 an hour in Charlotte, $25 an hour in New York, and then peg it like we do with Social Security to the cost of living increases so that we don't let the minimum wage, which was last increased under the beginning of the Obama administration, 2009. We haven't increased it since then. We can't let that happen again. We got to secure these families. When I started teaching medium security prison in California, Chino Prison, there were over 400 street gangs in Los Angeles. Situation was out of control. The movie Boys in the Hood was the first accurate depiction that I'd seen of the stories that I was hearing day after day in the prisons. It was clear to me the system was broken, that these people were forgotten, that they didn't have a voice, and a lot of them gave up on voting as well as given up on trying to make it in society. So they are underrepresented, and we need to be that voice if we're going to restore the American dream.
Yes, absolutely. I remember reading that, and anyone in the audience, all you have to do is Google kids count and then look for
Right.
South Carolina or your state, and you'll find that an overwhelming, often many cases, the majority of Black males by the third grade are performing, they're less than proficient in reading, writing, and arithmetic. So it automatically kind of puts them on a course. And then, Mal, you know about there's a thing called tracking in educational. People deny it, but once you get caught in special ed or vocational or something like that, it's hard to get out for a student without extra help, right?
Well, you're right about that. We don't provide much extra help. Many classes are too big, and we don't have teachers' aides in the classes. But fundamentally, you're right. We have to turn the clock back because up until the fourth grade, they're learning to read. And after that, they read to learn. If you're
Mm-hmm.
behind, as you point out in the third grade, it's really tough to catch up. We don't have enough summer programs. The kids who are hurt the worst by having the long summer break are the low income kids that are falling behind in reading because they forget the most and their parents are less able, for a range of reasons, to help them catch up. We got to catch them as early as possible. I got to admit, I was depressed and surprised to find that we still only have about half of the kids who are eligible for Head Start in Head Start. And this is a program that's been around for 50 years as part of the war on poverty. And a lot of the kids aren't in that program. They need to be. We could pay those teachers better. We could train them better. And of course, we can have smaller classes. There's a role for the federal government. And again, we've got to tax the wealthy their fair share so we responsibly invest in this country and create more opportunity. You know, the taxes on the wealthy under Eisenhower were 90% for the wealthiest 1%. And now we're talking about maybe raising it to 25% on the billionaire class. I mean, we need those resources all over Europe. The taxes on the wealthy are much higher, and they have more money for K-12 education, making college free or very affordable, money for public housing, money for health care, paid child care, family leave. And we can do that too. We're 70 years behind what the advanced industrial societies are doing in Europe. Yet you never, on the corporate-owned mass media, hear about that. In fact, if I
Mhm.
might, I'd like to go a step further. On Labor Day, listen for stories about minimum wage, because many years past, not just Fox, but even CNN and ABC and CNN and CBS don't cover minimum wage even on Labor Day, because they are owned by the billionaire class or corporations. So they're not sharing the misery that people endure when they're working for minimum wage. And this is a disgrace, and we have to change it. So somebody has to raise these issues, and I'll do my share.
And I don't think many people realize that when they turn on to CNN or MSNBC or Fox, etc., that these companies are actually owned by corporations.
Right.
They're owned by members of the super rich, and of course, they're not. You're not going to see anything that talks against what they're doing. Um, Another thing that you know we have. What is your position? Because the whole thing about right to bear arms, Second Amendment, and people using that to say, "Hey, I need to be able to arm myself to the teeth for my protection and to protect the U.S. government." And we see that mass shootings are happening almost on a weekly basis now. If they count mass shootings as 3 people or more. So they're happening almost every week at the very least. And then God, who knows how many actual shootings we have in this country. What's your position on self-defense, which is a constitutional and human right, and the problem we have with wanton gun violence, and it just seems to be growing and escalating, and the people who are involved seem to be younger and younger. What's your position in terms of Second Amendment rights, gun rights, and how does that fit in, or how do we make sure that gun ownership is not contributing to all the murders and senseless violence being done across our country today?
Well, you're right. It's a disgrace and a tragedy. And again, no industrialized country strikes the balance the way we have. And on assault rifles, we have our police chiefs going to Washington the last 20 years saying ban them. It puts our officers at risk. We're not close to striking an honest balance. The NRA is a very powerful lobby, and Republicans have bought into it, and they fight against all common sense gun control. There needs to be significant background checks. We need to put money into mental health programs, and we'll ultimately have to look at the root cause of why there's high crime rates. We'll have to look at why half of the violence with weapons in the United States is from weapons at home, with suicides or domestic violence. So training to get a weapon, as they do in many other countries, we've got to develop better plans in that regard. But I think ultimately, looking at the experience in Los Angeles, once gangs get started, those policies won't be nearly enough. We have to couple that with looking at the root causes of crime. And if people have a sense of hope and a good education, they're far less likely to drift into a gang. So I think it's a whole range of policies that we have to start to invest in. And ultimately, people are going to have to get more involved in politics because Republicans have blocked this legislation. I would submit that we got off to a very good start at the beginning of the Obama administration, the beginning of the Biden administration. But after 2 years, when Republicans took back the House, changes in policy stopped. So we're going to have to figure a way to inspire our folks say, okay, part of the struggle is electoral. A lot of it's in the community, in your church, in your family, but some of it's electoral. And if we gain the presidency, the Senate, and the House, it's clear we can pass a lot of good legislation and invest a lot of money in this country and make a much more secure country. We're being blocked by Republicans that don't want common sense gun control.
And I, again, one of the things that have always just mystified me is that you look at gangs in Central America, South America, Haiti, other places, and we can look at it very closely and see poverty and bad government. But it's always kind of got to me that in this country, what we call poor people would not be considered poor in other countries. You know, I'm poor, but I have a house that Section 8 pays for. I can eat crab legs and steak with my EBT cards. You know, I have some kind of medical care that's available to me. Not the best, not as it should be, but compared to other countries where people are eating out of trash heaps and things like that. I think that the soul of America, that it's not just about money. I think it's what do you think? Maybe it's what we see, this love for materialism, and but we're not as poor as other countries. That's what I'm trying to say. So why is our gang problem so widespread? You've been in the prisons. Do you want to reflect on that in some kind of a way?
Well, a lot of studies indicate what anecdotally I was hearing in the prison over 5 years. Usually, when the parents are in despair, the kids fall into despair. They stop trying in school, they fall behind, school is tough, and they start running on the streets to get their needs met. So, the more fragile families, while they're wealthier than people in Haiti or Bangladesh, are still food insecure. They're unable to create safe home environments, decent housing, keep the lights on, water, enough food. And the kids figure, well, I don't really respect mom and dad, and I'm going to have to figure another way. And it sure seems like life is a jungle. And once they fall into that mindset, it happens at a very early age, they become wannabes with the gangs who quickly recruit them and use them, because if they get arrested moving drugs around, their sentences are much lighter than somebody who's an adult. So they literally get recruited into the gangs. And then once they decide that they might not want that life, it's tough to get out of the gangs. It's blood in, but blood out. So
Yeah,
it's a bit like a social cancer for continuing. And if the gangs are effective at pushing drugs or moving weapons around, and there's a lot of money, then a lot of people will stay with it because it's semi-organized crime. And it's hard to end that once it gets started. I think, if we're able to stabilize families with better wages, housing, medical care, paid and quality child care, paid family leave, these social programs, far fewer of the fragile families will fall apart, and far fewer kids will feel the need to run the streets to get their needs met. You never end it entirely, but you can make a significant change in a community. And we've got to make those investments. And, it's clear to everybody who teaches in the prison. If you're there for 6 months, you have a feeling once you learn the language and the culture and you're kind of at ease and people are talking to you, they're telling you their life story. You go there, but for the grace of God, go I. I would have made some of those mistakes. And you start looking at it differently and you realize, how do we catch these kids before they lose hope? And it comes back to what you were saying. You got to get those kids really early. And if we do, we have a much better chance of reaching them, and they have a much better chance of having a productive life. I think we kid ourselves by talking about high school dropout rates. I think nowadays you need a couple years of community college to be able to secure
Mhm.
a job in a global economy. And it's a rapidly changing global economy with technological knowledge doubling every 2, 3 years. So people have to be trained in order to get a good job and be able to be retrained to hang on to a job. So I think our metrics need to change, and thus our investments need to change.
Yes,
If I
absolutely.
might say
And
one more thing,
sure.
you know, President Obama, in talking to conservative groups, used the language that we don't typically use, but I think it's effective. And he said, studies show that $1 invested in early childhood education yields about $7 in return. So if you're in business and don't invest $1 to get 7, you shouldn't be in business and you shouldn't be in government.
Right, right. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And so you mentioned teen suicide, which we know is rising, both males and females, but females at a much higher rate. And
Mhm.
then also we have, what's going on with changes with the way we generate energy, the climate change crisis. We were just watching something earlier at my office where we have scientists saying that if we are not going to do what we need to do and keep the temperature of the planet from increasing by 2 degrees, by it just getting 2 degrees hotter, 2.5 degrees hotter, that we may reach a stage where climate change actually becomes an existential problem. In other words, it becomes a matter that may have not only 6 million species, but human beings who might be losing their lives, certain areas becoming extinct, and an end to civilization as we know. Now we've had the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and others that potentially could mean all kinds of jobs for the poor, the needy, the middle class, dealing with climate change, EV charging stations, solar panels, energy efficiency, geothermal, wood turbines. How do you feel about this whole controversy about whether or not climate change is real, what we should do about it, and is the clock ticking? I know you've done a lot around Earth Day and other things. Is the clock ticking? Are we
The clock's
running out of
ticking.
time?
We've gotten warnings from major reports from the United Nations where they pull 2,000 scientists together from over 100 countries, a lot of different disciplines. They've got 5-year reports. I know you've read them too. And each report becomes more dire about what we're doing to the earth. Our civilization is a force of nature that's threatening our security. The Pentagon report 2003 said climate change is a greater threat to national security than terrorism.
Mhm.
And in that report, they talked about the shortages of water causing farmers to move into areas in Syria. It's led to the shortage of water and famine in southern Sudan, leading to the wars between Sudan and southern Sudan, the wars in Yemen because of a lack of water, the floods in Pakistan, where the government was too weak and the Taliban stepped in to provide doctors and food and water. And the Pentagon is clear that climate change leads to more conflict and also more migration as people desperate to take care of their families are leaving areas in Central America to come across our southern border to have some life with dignity. That already is not just at a stage of some people coming in, it's already at the stage of lots of people coming in. It's tough to know how many, but as we get more droughts and floods, and people are unable to sustain themselves in developing countries. We're going to have more immigration here. We've seen people leaving from Africa, desperate to get across the Mediterranean to get into Europe. And, we've talked about this, but, as the Earth heats up and the polar ice caps melt, then the oceans absorb the heat rather than the white on the polar caps reflecting it, the albedo effect. You also have, as oceans get warmer, they expand, leading to more flooding. And we're already getting flooding in Charleston and Miami and even the city of Georgetown in our congressional district. So it's already happening. And you're right, this is going to accelerate. The Biden administration did a good job. It would have been a better job if Republicans would have signed on to more investments in infrastructure, more money for sustainable energy, a sustainable electrical grid that's safer from cyber attack, that brings solar and wind energy from rural areas into urban areas. You're really the expert on this, and I revere your work, but we're on the same wavelength with this, and there's a significant role for government. Certainly, local and state government could do a lot more, but the real resources are from the federal government. The standards are going to come from the federal government, which is why Democrats need to take back the House of Representatives to pass this legislation as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in a country that is deeply divided by partisan politics, that each party likes to point the finger at the other one. But I'm just going to be candid about something, and I know some of the people in office and running for office are not going to like this, but there's a saying, speak truth to power. And here's the truth. We have so many people who are elected on both the state legislative level and the federal level. And when I speak to them, they don't seem to know very much about climate change. They don't seem to be very interested in doing anything about it. And that's both on the Republican and the Democratic side. And if they do know, they're not coming back and sharing the information with the people who voted for them, the citizens of their district. So what would you do? And what do you think others should do, Democrat and Republican, in terms of letting the people of this nation know what's really going on? What are the full impacts and threats to climate change? Because I know what you said about scientists all around the world, and they're telling us by 2050, if we haven't done the things we need to do, look out, because we won't be living in the same civilized world that we're living in today. So what would you do, both to educate your colleagues in Congress, and what should be done so that the people of this country really know how dangerous, how bad things are, and how short the scientists are telling us that the time is getting where we can do something significant to make sure that climate change isn't more deadly and isn't worse. So what would you do? Because I know as I do, that a lot of people in elected office don't know about what the Pentagon and scientists are calling the biggest global problem that human beings on this planet have ever faced. What would you do to educate your colleagues and the people in your district?
I've been trying to do it as a teacher, and it's clear that we need to start this education in kindergarten. There are programs where kids are playing outside and talking about these issues. We don't train our teachers properly. In most colleges, we don't require a class on the environment. So we've got a lot to do with education. But you're right. Democrats don't have the sense of urgency that they need, even though they've passed a lot of policies that are far better than the Republican obstructionism. They need to go a lot further. And part of it, as we've talked about before, is money in politics. I mean, someone like Jamie Harrison, who ran for the Senate here, needed to raise over $100 million, and he lost by 11%. So a lot of promises made to very wealthy interests because of decisions made by the Supreme Court in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, where unlimited money can come into super PACs and you don't have to disclose where it's coming from. So all sorts of energy interests have a great hold over elected officials, many Democrats as well as Republicans. And
so Mal, quickly, for our audience, can you, because some folks don't know what Citizens United is or what super PACs are. So can you just explain that to people?
Sure.
So
In the
they
Citizens United case,
what,
which came up to the Supreme Court, they were looking at money as to whether it was free speech at election time. And a very conservative Supreme Court decided that it was, and that if you were to donate money to a political action committee, a super PAC, that can't give money directly to candidates, but can run ads, that you'd be able to give unlimited amounts and you don't have to disclose who's given the money. And that's a decision made by our Supreme Court that no other Supreme Court in any advanced industrial society has come up with. And it floods our political process with money, making elections closer to auctions than elections. I mean, if I'm able to get the nomination in this district, a standard contested race for Congress is a couple $1 million. I'm a teacher. How am I going to get that? Well, hopefully we can galvanize enough people. They can tell, oh, this candidate's serious. He's saying some things that are important. We need to get behind him because we're looking at a crisis. And I agree with you that it's the most severe crisis facing humanity. As Desmond Tutu, Nobel Prize winner from South Africa, said, this is hitting the poor the hardest. They have the least ability to adjust and to move. We know this is happening. And if there's not peace with the earth, there won't be peace on earth. This is blinking red. But I think to allude to something that you had mentioned earlier in the talk tonight, the materialism that we have here is an addiction. And the middle class is wealthier than biblical kings could have dreamed of being, while the other America is living paycheck to paycheck, just scrambling to get by. And those who are living paycheck to paycheck aren't thinking about the environment the way they need to. And a lot of the middle class is going from entertainment to music to sports and not concerning themselves the way they need to with questions of poverty or jobs or healthcare or the environment. You know, Martin Luther King called for a revolution of values. You and I have talked about this, but I'd like to share it, that would accompany the freedom and scientific revolutions engulfing the earth. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, property rights and profits are more important than people, then racism, materialism, and militarism can't be conquered. I think King was right, and I'm trying to share that message.
It's amazing, so many things that Dr. King and others talked about, saw visionaries who saw what was in place and what it would lead to. That quote that you just gave is like so applicable to today. And so basically, as you said, as individuals, we can only donate so much money to a candidate, but corporations, super PACs, can give as much as they want for advertising. And that's why sometimes you have to hear candidates say, this message is approved by me. Because there's so many
Right.
messages, you don't know where they're coming from, but you do know that they're supporting one candidate or supporting one particular party. And without those donations, people couldn't get elected, except for you. You say you're not taking corporate money, you're not taking banking dollars. So you're counting on the people doing exactly what democracy is supposed to be about. Democracy, demos, is the word for people, the Greek word for people, and then the rest means rule of by the people, right? And so if we don't move from a place where dollars are electing people to people's vote, people's vote is what should be electing people, not not advertising, not PAC money, none of those things. So what about housing? What about housing? Uh,
Near and
that
dear to
not
my heart. I met my late wife at a forum that I held at Coker on homelessness. And we both served on the board of the homeless shelter in Hartsville until we couldn't raise money from the county, the state, or the federal government and had to close the facility after 5 years. I was beyond frustrated seeing the limitations there. The waiting list for public housing in big cities is about 5 years. This could be dealt with public funds. It could be dealt with tax breaks for private developers so they can at least get a modest rate of return in building low income housing. Those two methods are not mutually exclusive. We could do both. But most of the constituents that would like to see more public housing are just living day to days and they're not involved in the political process. Or if they do vote, they're not putting money in to elections. And a lot of the middle class isn't thinking about the housing problem. So
mhm.
we let down working people and we let down those that are desperate. We don't have treatment on demand for those who are homeless. We don't have enough in the way of mental health counseling. I think it would be good for leadership training for those at the state, county, and local level to teach in a low income school for a month and then to see what life is like in a homeless shelter and in public housing. Let them be public servants, servant leaders. And I think they'd pretty quickly start to sort out that we need to make some different investments in society. I don't think they can imagine it. It's out of sight, out of mind.
Well, let me ask you this because I've spoken with some general contractors, black, white, people who do big projects, those who wish they could get large projects, And I've asked them, I said, if you could build a house for $300,000 or build a house for 150,000, what are you going to do? And they said, hey, we're going to build the house for 300,000. We make more in profit. We do less work. And so I just want to ask you this question. Since so much of the housing and the development um, of cities and suburbs and rural areas is driven by the amount of profit that the contractors and developers make. What about subsidies, housing subsidies? We pay farmers not to grow crops so that the price of food doesn't drop down too low. What do you think about the prospect of maybe providing subsidies to contractors and developers so that, hey, yeah, I'll make more money if I build this $300,000 house, but maybe I'll do development, maybe I'll do homes in low wealth communities if
I think
I
it's a
knew I
great
was.
idea. places that have been tried. It's been tried. It works. You want to get families that are ready to move from rentals into a home so they can build equity, stabilize their family. And we could give subsidies for homes that are $80,000 to $100,000 that are more
Mhm.
affordable. And I think there'd be an awful lot of takers. I've talked to a number of young people. I was talking to a former student who worked at Wells Fargo Bank. Just the other day, we were talking about that idea. You could do planned communities for young families and build parks and playgrounds in the center of it. And there ought to be subsidies for that. And I, I, I think it's just a lack of imagination. We don't focus a lot on housing. You know, it rarely comes up if you look at the mass media. They'll do some stories on homelessness, um, but uh, clearly these type of policies would potentially be successful, and other countries have used them, and I think it would
Mhm.
be a good step in the right direction.
Yes, yeah, and the other thing is um, policies that look at the housing problem as a continuum. Our homeless population is growing because people cannot afford to move into homes because there's not enough affordable homes for low wealth and middle income people. So, how do you feel? Let me put it this way: if we had a continuum of service where it was like, okay, you're homeless, we'll get you into an apartment. We'll help you with financial literacy so you can save enough money to become a homeowner. You become a homeowner, your first home, you want to build a bigger house as your family gets larger. And then as you get older and your children are gone, you want to downsize and sell that bigger house and get a smaller one. How do you feel about us looking at policies that don't look at one issue at a time, but instead look at things as a continuum, so that we have monies in place and support in place for people no matter where they are on that continuum. I'm a middle class family. I need a little help to get a bigger home. I want to sell my big home now that I'm retired and the kids are gone, but I also need to make sure that some of that equity, that extra money that I have, it goes into something that's going to help me with retirement investments, etc. What do you think about something like that, where you're talking about a policy, or is that too much for a policy, a law, or having a federal program that can budget along a continuum?
Well, the sociologist in me and the guy who enjoys looking at policy knows you're right. You need to have the wraparound services for the homeless because they need drug treatment, they need financial literacy, they need mentors, they need uh, some sort of background, some social worker working with them, and some are able to stabilize their lives. A lot of them, mental health and drug problems are significant there. And if we're able to make those investments and get them into a place, it's actually cheaper than leaving them on the streets. And of course, much more dignified, a much greater chance for stabilizing their lives. You're right also in inferring that the rungs on the ladder for social success and for advancement are much wider, which is why I think we need to invest in making college affordable. It was $300 a year for UCLA when I started there. We can make college affordable, community college free, which gives people a better chance to succeed and to not carry around a debt. There can be investments in America to create more jobs, whether it's in sustainable energy or rebuilding our infrastructure. I mean, all of that creates more opportunity for people. I like the idea of subsidies to builders so that people move from rentals into affordable homes. And I like the idea, if you're at a certain income, if you're going to downsize, that you should be able to have a more secure retirement. And along that line with Social Security, some of your listeners may not realize that the Social Security taxes are capped at 168,000. So you pay 6.2% on your income for Social Security, and your employer matches it. This goes into a fund. But above an income of 168,000, you're not paying any additional taxes. It's not even a flat tax. They're not paying their fair share. And we've got about a fourth of our seniors can't afford prescription drugs. The Biden administration wants to take those who work minimum wage and retired, who have very little money in Social Security, not enough to live on in Social Security, to bump that amount up about $400 or $500 a month. It could be bumped higher than that. They're going to spend the money immediately and have a lot more dignity. There's a lot that we can do to invest in this country. And it comes back to something you and I have been talking about for years. The wealthy have to pay their fair share. And the reason the taxes are the way they are is elections are so expensive that people have to sell their souls in order to get elected, and they're not going to raise taxes on those that are donating to their campaigns.
Mhm. Thank you, Mal. I was just going to ask you to kind of wrap things up because we have about 2 minutes, maybe less to go. And you did a great job of like kind of going across the board. But so we have about 2 minutes to wrap up. I can give you 1 minute to tell folks about what when the election is, the primary, what seat you're running from for. I said from. You might want to run from it after you get up there.
Yeah.
um, what seat you're running for, and then how people can contact you, website if they want to volunteer, phone number, whatever. But thank you for being on. Time always flies when we're conversing, and we can talk about so much more and probably have a plan where we think we're saving everybody on the planet. But it's good to have creative ideas. So how can folks meet you? How can they meet you, help you, and get in touch with you?
Well, it's great to join you as always. And we covered a lot of ground. And the campaign of common sense for the common good is a way of framing liberty and justice for all, emphasis on all. Malhyman.com is my website, and people can volunteer, donate. And it really helps. If you thought I was on the right track, tell your friends. Go check this guy out, malhyman.com, and see for yourself where I'm coming from. This is a lifelong journey. I'm really glad that, we've worked on so many projects together, and it's a pleasure to join you tonight. Thanks, Leo.
Okay, thank you. But one thing quickly before you leave, and I do my little bit. Tell folks when the primary is,
Oh,
and
yeah,
tell them
thanks.
what counties and parts of the county your district makes up, so people know
Thanks.
whether or not they can vote for you.
Primary is June 11th. There is early voting for a range of reasons, not difficult to do early voting. And the district, 7th Congressional District, goes from Georgetown, Horry, Marion, Florence, Darlington, Marlborough, Chesterfield, and Dillon, 8 counties. And,
Wow.
it's a lot of ground to cover. So it's great to be able to be on a podcast where we can reach more people. And, if there are places where you'd like me to speak, please contact us. Let me know, because I'll do as many events a day as I can. I want to talk to people. If I get elected, I want to do as many town halls as I can do. Thanks,
Okay.
Leo.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy hearing the position, the ideas of Dr. Mal Hyman, candidate for District 7 of the U.S. House of Representatives for Congress. And if you want to reach me, Reverend Leo Woodbury, you can do so by emailing me at info@newalphacdc.com. Remember to go to our website, newalphacdc.com, and subscribe to our magazine, EJ Today, Environmental Justice Today. Got an issue coming out June 1st, our new quarterly issue, and you can call me at the church where I am blessed to pastor. That's Kingdom Living Temple, 705 South Irby Street in the Magic City of Florence, South Carolina. Phone number 843-799-0740. And thank you, Dr. Hyman. Thank you all for listening in. And until next week this time, if you want to know the places you need to go and know the things that will help you to grow, it's the Leo and Larry Show. God bless you.